Great.
So good morning. We're all set.
Okay. I have my pup here who's very excited. Um, good morning, Chair Durfee and members of the committee. My name is Laura Ireland, and I teach animal law and policy and live in Barrie. I am testifying in support of H326. The scientific evidence is overwhelmingly demonstrates that first and second generation anticoagulant rodenticides are toxic chemicals that are inhumane and pose significant threats to our wildlife. And I urge you to support this important legislation. Anticoagulant rodenticides work by interfering with an animal's ability to clot blood, causing a slow and painful death due to internal bleeding. While this is really horrible in its own right, the impacts extend far beyond the targeted mice, rats, and whatever small critters enter the bait boxes. The very nature of these rodenticides ensures that animals who hunt rodents will also be poisoned. These poisons accumulate in the food chain, leading to widespread secondary poisoning in non-target species such as owls, hawks, foxes, bobcats, and other essential predators. Numerous studies have found that more than 70% of tested raptors in New England have been exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides with devastating effects on their populations. Fortunately, humane and sustainable rodent control solutions exist. Integrated pest management strategies, including habitat modification, exclusion techniques, and non-toxic deterrents, provide effective long-term solutions without endangering Vermont's ecosystems. There are Vermont companies such as Hart Wildlife Removal and Green Ears Pest Control who have proven their successful alternatives to poisons. While I'm testifying in my personal capacity, I've learned more about this issue as students are exploring ways to eliminate rodenticides on campus. I'm proud of our students and alumni who are working to advance these protections at the law school and throughout the state. We explore these types of issues in our animal ethics class. What is it that we allow for animals who we call pets versus what we allow for animals we call pests? Poisoning animals and allowing them to suffer for days is only something we're tolerating for the little animals who we call pests. Vermont has long been a leader in environmental protection and wildlife conservation. Passing this bill would reaffirm our commitment to safeguarding our native species and maintaining balanced ecosystems while being more humane. So I urge you to take action to eliminate the use of these dangerous chemicals in our state by supporting H326 to protect Vermont's wildlife from any unnecessary harms of anticoagulant rodenticides. Thank you for your time and consideration. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good. Thank you, Professor Ireland. I've got a couple of questions just in response to your comments. You mentioned research, and I'm wondering whether you can point us to any research and possibly suggest anyone who might like to come in and testify to the committee presenting any research that's available. So that's just a note, maybe if you could
Sure.
get back to us on that. And then while you're taking that note, I also wondered whether you could speak a little bit more to alternative pest control methods.
Yeah, and admittedly, I am not an expert on pest control. I can certainly also send you the information that I found about the alternatives that we're looking for on campus. And other ways, California has passed legislation about this issue, and they have a number of great resources for restaurants, universities, other like large institutions and also households to be able to do things like, sealing holes, making sure garbage is contained. There's a lot to be done to not be attractive to rodents. And then also ways to make sure that you're not using poisons that then allow these rodents and other small critters to be out in the wild and then poisoning others. So I'm happy to share what those alternatives are.
Thank you. Let me turn to the committee and see whether anyone has questions.
My only question was, are there alternatives if she's going to take care of that? for us?
Yes, okay. Representative Lipsky.
On the screen, thank you, Laura, there's the VLGS. What does that stand for?
So I work at Vermont Law and Graduate School, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the Animal Law Policy Institute or Vermont Law and Graduate School. Just speaking on behalf of myself.
Thank you.
Anyone else? And Representative Burt joined us, and I think you came in just as we were getting started, so
Okay.
didn't really miss too much there yet.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and I'll email over my written testimony as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, and just I don't see any other questions. If there's anything else that you feel like you can share now or would like to share now about what the research has shown specifically on impact to wildlife, we'd be happy to hear that. But if not, if you want to point us in another direction, that's fine too.
Sure. No, yeah, I think it'd be better to just go ahead and email over the various research and point you to some other experts in this area. And I do believe you're going to be hearing from somebody who works at VINS, which is a wildlife rehabilitation center, who I'm sure will have some firsthand stories about the impacts that they've seen on wildlife that they're rehabbing.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we can let you get back to your work. You're welcome to stay on the call as well. We've got a couple of other witnesses, as you just mentioned. I'm not sure whether they're here yet.
No, that's okay. Yeah, if they're not kind of ready to go, I will just make sure to watch the recording in a little bit.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and just a side note, while I have you there, and how much? But our students are going to be joining or coming over to the Capitol next Wednesday, so we might seek you out and have some students sitting in on some hearings. So I look forward to maybe meeting you next week.
Great. We would look forward to meeting them too.
Great, thanks.
All right. Good morning, John and Anna. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And we're running a little ahead of schedule. John, if you are ready and would like to jump in now with your testimony,
Sure.
we could certainly get started with that. Do you have anything that you wanted to share on the screen?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, if you could just introduce yourself then to us and tell us why you're here, and we would be happy to hear your testimony.
Okay, my name's John Magaranis. I'm a retired U.S. Army veterinary technician, and I'm also a retired animal control officer from a little town just west of Boston. I'm here to testify against rodenticides based on my experiences I've had over the years picking up assorted different animals that were inflicted with rodenticide poisoning. There's an organization in Massachusetts, college called Tufts College, and they have a wildlife clinic there. So over my course of my tenure as an animal control officer, I brought many, many animals to the Tufts Wildlife Clinic that were suffering from rodenticide poisoning. One case I'd like to talk about real quick that really had an impact on me was I got a call one time. A homeowner said they had a large dead bird in their backyard. So I went there and I found the bird. It was actually an owlet, a great horned owl baby. And it was still alive, laying on the ground. And so I went over to wrap him up and I looked up to see where the nest was. And out comes tumbling out of the nest was a second great horned owl chick. Both of them were put to sleep at Tufts Wildlife Clinic because they just weren't responding to the vitamin K treatment. I guess I just don't understand why we're killing all the same animals that would eat the rats and the mice and the problem animals. I mean, foxes, coyotes, owls, hawks, you name it. These animals eat rodents, and we're poisoning them along with the rodents. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Kind of lost a thought there, but there are all kinds of different avenues that people can explore. I moved from just out of west of Boston to out in the middle of Massachusetts. I'm out in the country. I completely understand where people are coming from, because if you don't get proactive with rodent control, you stand to lose your motorcycles, your cars, your tractors, snow blowers, because the mice get in there and they chew them all up. So I understand that you have to be proactive, but poisoning them and then letting other animals eat them to get poison makes no sense to me at all. There are snap traps out there, which I use. They kill instantly. I take them out of this trap. I throw them out my backyard, hopefully to encourage predators to come and eat the live ones. And that works great. There's another product called the Rat Zapper. It's electric. It's reusable. It doesn't, there's no poison involved. It electrocutes them. They're dead. You throw them away, you rearm it, and you're good to go. So I just don't understand where this use of rodenticide has any merit at all. It's just, it's not accomplishing anything what we want it to do. It's just, I think it's making the matters worse. And one more thought I'd like to leave you with. It's believed that coyotes can eat up to 1,800 rodents a year. 1,800. So that's 1,800 rodents along with their offspring that you've just increased the population by poisoning one coyote. And that's true for foxes, coyotes, gray fox, red fox, all those types of animals. So it just doesn't make any sense, especially when we have other avenues to use to control pests. And I hate to use the word pests, but where I live, and I'm sure a lot of people in Vermont, it's out in the country. And if you don't get proactive protecting your stuff, the mice will just tear it up. So that's my testimony. Like I said, I brought countless. I don't have any data for you because I'm retired now, but I can tell you one call to Tufts Wildlife Clinic, and they should be able to give you some unbelievable numbers. But just based on my own memory, I can remember bringing hawks, owls, turkey vultures, foxes. I believe one coyote. I might be mistaken on that, but I believe one coyote that had rodenticide poisoning. So all these animals are all predators of rodents. So why are we killing them? It just doesn't make any sense. So
John,
I'm open for any questions.
good, thank you. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you, John. On those two owls that you brought to Tufts that you spoke about 5 minutes ago, what was the toxicology? What was the cause of?
Rodenticide poisoning, anticoagulant. That's from Tufts. Tufts, whenever you bring an animal to Tufts, they give you an access number. And so you can call the next day and find out how that animal is doing or what they're doing for it. So I always called. The next day, I always called. Every animal I ever brought in, I always followed up to see how they're doing. So those two particular owlets were put to sleep because they just did not respond to the vitamin K, which is a treatment for rodenticide poisoning.
Representative Nelson, did you have a question?
I do. I have a couple. John, is it? I understand fair amount about rodenticides. Is it the practices to use them that are not being followed correctly? Is it the sloppy handling of them and not policing the area and removing the dead rodents, not using bait stations? Is that the problem more so than the actual agent? My wife's a veterinarian too, by the way, and we've had pretty good conversations about this. And then my second question is, you talk about foxes and coyotes and, around to eat these rodents. There's some facilities and rabies vector is real up here in Vermont. And there's some facilities that don't want foxes and coyotes up amongst their buildings to get the rodents. Large facilities, dairy farms, snap traps, you couldn't buy enough of them. And it's terrible to have a cow running around the barn with a snap trap hanging on the end of her tongue, and I've seen it. So, is it the practice that needs to be tightened up and education and using these tools correctly?
Well, I'll say this, I'm certainly no expert on the handling and procedural aspects of putting out rodenticide poison. But I will say this, you see the boxes all over the place, and they surely don't look like they're being monitored by anybody, in my opinion. So animals go in there, they eat the poison, they leave, and they go and suffer and die, and then they get eaten by other animals. Your comment about rabies, I don't know what the statistics are in Vermont, but rabies is fairly low disease here in Massachusetts, especially if you look at animals that have tested positive for rabies. Coyotes are way down on the list. Foxes are number 4 on the list for sure, but coyotes aren't that high. But even with rabies, I mean, that's, I don't get the fear about it. I mean, I guess people, get the Cujo image and all that, but, rabies is just a sickness. It's just a neurological sickness, and it's, and there's 2 types of rabies. A lot of people don't know that. There's dumb rabies and there's furious rabies. Most people think of rabies as furious rabies, Cujo, foaming at the mouth, biting inanimate objects. That's furious rabies. That's a very low percent compared to the other rabies, which is just sick. They get sick, they walk in circles, they fall down, they're just sick. And then they become easy prey for opportunistic predators like coyotes, because they see it like, for example, a raccoon, which they normally wouldn't go after a raccoon because they're pretty fierce themselves. But if a raccoon is suffering from rabies and not furious rabies, he's going to be walking around, falling down, walking in circles, bumping into things. So a coyote's going to evaluate that as an opportunity for an easy kill, and they'll go and kill and eat it. And you can eat rabies and not get it. So there is, as far as rabies concerns, it's good to have coyotes around, in my opinion. And there's no, I certainly admit there's no research to back that up. It's just my own opinion. But if you understand how rabies works and how wildlife works, you'll understand that having coyotes around during these rabies outbreaks is a good thing. And one last thing I want to comment on. Yeah, I have had a few mice caught like on their leg or their side of their face, and that is horrible. I don't like to kill anything healthy, but it's kind of par for the course. I mean, you do your best you can and try to limit the suffering, and that's all I'm doing. But I'm not putting poison out in the environment to have it come back and bite me in the butt, because that's what that stuff does. It just kills all the animals that would be eating those rodents. So again, I cannot make any sense out of rodenticide. even in the deep cities, there's still lots of birds of prey out in the cities and stuff like that. So, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Representative Nelson, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm gonna stop.
Okay. We can come back to you if you like. Representative Boslin.
Yeah, I just have a question. I mean, I've heard some statistics about wildlife in Vermont that a very high percentage of like raptors and fishers and bobcats have some percentage of rodenticides when if they find them and they do an analysis after they die, they find like, oh, they have 30% or some number like that. So you talked about these animals that you've encountered that had rodenticide poisoning and died. So what is the tolerance? Like at what point do you accumulate enough rodenticide that you would die if you're a mammal, say, or if you're a raptor? Is it multiple exposure, or would you die from only one exposure if you were a small animal? Could you say a little bit more about how that works?
Well, I'm certainly no expert in that field, but common sense tells me it's all based on size. So if you have a 35-pound animal compared to a 2-pound owl, their dose is going to be much different. So if one owl eats one rat that's been dosed with rodenticide compared to a coyote that eats one rat that has rodenticide, the difference is going to be huge. So I think for larger animals, it's going to be repetitive exposure. There's some great studies out in California regarding not bobcats, cougars, mountain lions, and rodenticide poisoning. So there's a lot of good information out there. But like I said, I'm no expert on all that, but it's just kind of common sense that an animal that's 30 pounds compared to an animal that's 2 pounds is going to be a significant difference in the escalation of their disease process.
That would make sense. I mean, I actually just read an article recently about a family of foxes and the babies were all dying, and that would make sense. The babies would be smaller. So if the babies ended up eating from exposed mice, they would have had a different experience than the mother. I mean, that makes sense the way you described that. Thank you.
And it's a horrible death, by the way. It's, they bleed internally. It's just horrible. I can recall an owl that I had picked up. It was an adult owl, and I peeled back the feathers, and you could just see the bruising underneath the skin. The blood was just pooling up underneath the skin. It was just bleeding to death. It's just awful. It's an awful thing for animals to endure when they don't have to.
John, I think you mentioned that you're retired, but previously had worked as an animal control officer.
Yes, I'm retired veterinary technician from the military, and I'm also a retired animal control officer.
We focused a little bit this morning on the impact on wildlife. In your professional life, have you encountered instances where household pets, PETS, dogs and cats, or other animals also might have suffered the same fate or similar fate?
I have not ever seen or even had any information from my fellow animal control officers regarding any domestic pets that had succumbed to rodenticide poisoning, which is good.
Let's see if there's any other questions, John, before we let you go. Well, thank you for your testimony. And
thank you. I wish you all a good day, and I hope you put a lot of thought and due process into this decision, because it's really important. I know there's a lot of people telling you that generation this and generation that is safe and all that, but personally, I don't believe it. A poison's a poison. You put it out in the environment, you never know what's going to happen. It's just not a good thing. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
you appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to stay on the call as well if you want, John. We're going to move on to Anna then.
Hi there.
Good morning.
So yeah, I'm just happy to build a lot on what John said. I think he said a lot of the things that I was going to say, but I can kind of add stuff to it. So my name is Anna Morris. I'm fighting a cold, so if my voice is weak, that's why. But I have lived in Vermont for about 10 years. I'm the director of wildlife ambassador programs at the Vermont Institute of Natural Science down in Quechee. We're a not-for-profit nature center, and our focus is on educating the public about the natural history of Vermont. We have a particular focus on raptors and birds of prey. And my background prior to being an educator and working with the birds in that way is I'm a raptor biologist. So I studied birds of prey in graduate school, doing research primarily on the social behavior of certain species. But in addition, I did always have an interest in toxicology and the pollutants in the environment that are affecting raptor populations. And there's a whole diversity of them beyond rodenticides. But rodenticides in particular do come up, of course, because an important prey base for raptors as a group is rodents. You know, everything from mice and voles and chipmunks and squirrels, absolutely everything, particularly for hawks and owls, as John was mentioning. And there are numerous studies from across North America that have looked at, as you were talking about before, the level of toxin in the bloodstream of both living and dead raptors that have been recovered. Notably, kind of locally, there was a 3-year study of birds of prey in New York State, so right next to us, and I'm just looking back at an article about it of 265 birds of prey that were tested in New York. 49% of them had some level of rodenticide in their system, so that's almost half of all of these birds that were trapped and tested for rodenticide. So it's, you know, incredibly ubiquitous within the environment, which is surprising. I think one of the questions that was asked was about, is this a responsibility thing? Are people just not using the rodenticides according to the manufacturer's recommendations, such that they're, you know, needlessly spreading into the environment? But there's a thing is you can't really control where it goes once you put it out there, particularly with the first and second generation anticoagulants, as I think this bill is addressing. The first generation anticoagulants are, it's necessary for the rodent to consume the bait multiple times in order to succumb. So that gives them the opportunity to go kind of out and back into the environment several times. The second generation anticoagulants, which are considered much more efficient, they're considered more efficient because it requires only one feeding at the bait station for the rodent to succumb. So it could be that they consume the poison one time, go back to their home or their nest and die there. But the important thing is we can't control where they're going to. So it does have this kind of like unchecked spread out into the environment. And
I'm gonna just interrupt here. We have a question from Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
How many raptors were in that study? How many birds had they caught to check? Was it 10? Was it 100? Was it 5?
It was 265.
65, good numbers.
Mhm.
Statistical. Now, raptors are migratory?
Some are, some aren't.
Species of raptors caught? You know, did they break that down?
Yes, they did. The majority of the I think they were targeting kind of just generally raptors native to New York State, but the species that they sampled most were great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, and eastern screech owls.
Okay. And were these caught in suburbia, urban, rural areas?
I believe they were focusing on suburban and urban areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And to me, the Cooper's hawks is surprising because they tend to be bird hunting birds. So they're not as going after rodents as the owls and the red tails are. Obviously, as we were saying, you know, birds have a much different metabolism. They have a much faster metabolism than mammals. So, you know, any sort of toxin that works its way through a mammal system is going to work its way faster and more intensely through a bird's system. But also, yeah, building on what John was saying, it's a very important role that raptors play within the ecosystem in the form of pest control on their own. Owls, for example. Barn owls are a good example. Not that we have a very high population of barn owls here. Instead, we have mostly barred owls, but they need to eat the equivalent of 3 to 4 mice a day to sustain themselves. They're not migratory, so they are staying in Vermont year round. So they're eating, multiple thousands of individual rodents throughout the year. And then if they're raising young, the barred owls have anywhere between 3 and 5 young in any given year. So those young are also needing to eat those rodents. And so they have many, many opportunities to encounter a poisoned rodent. And it just takes 2 or 3 poisoned rodents for a bird to succumb to the point where they need to go to a wildlife rehabilitator. Yeah.
Representative Nelson.
Are you, is that a fact or is that a summation?
That
You know, is that it, you know, what, that's my question. You know, 2 or 3 will tip them over the edge, or is
that's definitely an average, right? Because there's no way really to know specifically how much toxin is in an individual rodent. It's all based on how much of the bait that they've eaten. So that's kind of on an average across how much toxin can these mice hold.
and have any of these raptors been affected by the bromethylene product?
Yeah,
That is a different rodenticide. That's the one that keeps my wife, the doctor, up at night.
oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that keeps her up at night because she cannot reverse that one.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar with bromethylene. The kind of 3 of the main second generation anticoags are the brodifalcum, diphthialone, and bromadiolone. There are others. There are non-anticoagulant rodenticides out there on the market. They really have not been as well studied from what I've read. I haven't seen papers investigating how the toxicity to raptors of something like cholecalciferol, which, you know, one of the benefits of that one is it breaks down quickly within the environment. So it's not hanging around in the liver of these animals to get eaten by others. That's kind of the problems with the anticoagulants, is they don't break down in the environment quickly, and can be resistant to treatment.
So are we thinking there's different rodenticides that could be in the toolbox that could be used?
It's hard to say, again, because a lot of the research has focused on the anticoagulants that exist on the market, and the non-anticoagulants haven't been subject to the large sample size studies that the others have.
Thank you.
I think we're good at the moment for questions. If you wanted to pick it back up then.
Sure. I didn't have much more to add other than that, you know, a lot of the education that we do at the Nature Center already focuses on guiding people towards alternatives to rodenticides, because this is a problem that is well known and that we see as well. The Tufts Wildlife Clinic is the premier wildlife hospital in the region, but we see in the VIN Center for Wild Bird Rehabilitation about 75% of the birds that are rehabilitated every year in the state of Vermont. And it's not a large percentage of birds that we see, but a handful every year, and somewhere between 10 and 15 of the 1,000 birds that we see through our hospital every year have most likely rodenticide poisoning. It's very hard to diagnose without knowing exactly what happened, because it does have pretty broad spectrum symptoms. lethargy, bleeding internally, can be caused by a number of different things. But we do know that, between 10 and 15 of these birds every year respond to vitamin K treatment. So we can assume that they were suffering from these anticoagulant rodenticides. And so that it's definitely something that is easily preventable. For people making the choice not to use rodenticides, just so long as they know that that this is a problem. But I also do see, I get questions from people during programs that say, my pest control company told me that this particular chemical was safe for raptors. And I don't think we know enough to say that really truly at this point.
Anna, just going back to the study that you cited earlier with the 265 birds, were those mortalities or were they birds that were still alive that they were somehow testing?
I believe they were birds that were still alive. Yes. And that's many of the studies of rodenticide poisoning are done on birds that are still alive that have been trapped for other reasons. Researchers who are doing, bird banding for population dynamics will take a blood sample, and part of the testing that's done on the blood sample is testing for rodenticide presence. So those definitely are from birds that are still alive that are released post-testing, but that still have that poison, at least at a low level in their system.
A detectable level. Can you talk a little bit about the beyond killing a raptor, just having some level of rodenticide in the blood, in their bodies? What are the ramifications of that on the ecosystem, I guess? Maybe we'll put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the level of rodenticide, at a level that's sublethal, right? If it doesn't kill them outright, it's still going to cause them to be sick at some level, or, perform less than they would were they entirely healthy. The problems that rodenticide can cause with the internal bleeding, so any sort of bump or scrape that they have will cause bruising, will cause bleeding, will cause lethargy, will cause lack of appetite. Any of these things prevent the birds from being, accurate in their hunting, being able to provision their nest, so bring back food to the babies in the nest, will have cascading effects, therefore, on the population. Birds of prey, most of the large birds of prey in that study, so the gray horned owls, the red-tailed hawks, are both kind of apex predators within their ecosystem, and those are difficult to replace. They, have very low adult mortality due to natural causes. A red-tailed hawk that survives its first winter is going to live for 20 or 25 years in the wild and produce 3 young on average every single year of its life. So removing that bird at any stage from the ecosystem then removes also other potential red-tailed hawks that are going to move in to replace that bird when it dies. And thus has kind of, cascading effects on the number of rodents that are in the population because they're not having this pressure put on them by the predatory raptors.
I guess and maybe you answered and I just didn't quite catch it, but beyond mortality, if that red-tailed hawk survives the first winter and ingests a certain amount, some detectable amount, are they likely to lead a shorter life? Will they lead a just as long a life but be unable to reproduce as much?
Right.
Other implications?
Yeah, the rodenticide, if it does not outright kill the bird, will eventually work its way out of the bird system. So it's not something that, you know, is going to permanently stay with them unless it kills them. So a low level rodenticide poisoning may only have the effect on that bird of reducing its hunting capability temporarily as it sort of takes a step back and feels really sick for several days. But so long as it can survive and feed itself through that period, they will kind of move the rodent, their liver will clear the toxin out of their system. The problem becomes if at any point within that system of recovery, do they ingest more? Does that add to the level that they're dealing with?
Oh, Representative Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. How many raptors did you say you got, like 10 to 15 raptors in per year, or 10 to 15 you suspect were rodenticide?
10 to 15 suspected rodenticide per year out of the roughly 1,000 birds that the clinic sees.
Okay, and the other 985, are those car collisions?
Pretty much.
I found car collisions. Now, I didn't have to send them in to have them checked to see if they were partially, infected with rodenticide, but.
Yeah, no, and that is an excellent question. It's the largest cause of admission among birds into the Vins Wildlife Clinic is unknown, meaning we don't actually know what caused them to be in the state that they're in now. We're simply treating what the symptoms that we're observing. The second is car collisions. So we get a lot of birds that are hit by cars, but we also get a lot of birds that folks pick up who are downed. They're just sitting on the ground, making no effort to fly away from people. They're lethargic. They're very, very thin. So obviously they haven't been hunting. They haven't been feeding themselves. And we can't necessarily identify the cause that started this process. I don't know enough to say whether rodenticides are implicated in something like that. Simply because we really cannot identify the cause for, I'd say it falls to, it's about 20% of the birds that come in. We don't know what happened to them.
Okay, and my last question to that, and I hope the answer is 0. How many do you find with lead issues, whether it's ingestion or projectiles? I hope the answer is 0.
Yeah, it's a whole other area of interest of mine. Unfortunately, the answer is not 0 at all. We see primarily turkey vultures and bald eagles with lead toxicity. Where the turkey vultures, it would be direct ingestion of lead shot. We actually, this is a horrible story, but I do tell it as, illustrative. We had a turkey vulture that came in with obvious lead toxicity. We took a blood sample and ran it through our own lead detection machine at the clinic, and it came back too high, could not be read. So we sent the sample to Cornell. They have a much more broad spectrum machine. Their machine said it was too high, could not be read, and they called us and said, "Is this bird still alive?" It was alive when we took the sample, but unfortunately it needed to be euthanized because it was not responding to any form of treatment. And that's a turkey vulture, and turkey vultures are known for being extremely tolerant of environmental toxins. That's one of the reasons why they're such an important part of any ecosystem.
So how many raptors do you get that have been shot? And it will bother me at any number.
Yeah.
And I'm a hunter, and you don't do that.
No, of course. And I feel like our community is very well known that you don't do that. In my time at Vins, I've been there about 10 years. Like I said, I have not seen any cases where a bird was shot. We do have 2 permanent resident turkey vultures who are ambassadors that live at Vins, and we care for them, both of whom were shot. And that was 15, 20 years ago that those birds came in to us.
I need to visit your place. I really like to see it sometime.
You're all invited.
Thank you.
Representative Burt had a question.
Yes, I'm just curious in the testing of raptors for rodenticides. Are you able to distinguish between the different types of rodenticide? Maybe you said that, maybe I didn't catch it. Or is
Yeah.
it, how do you pick out that particular chemical?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not an expert in that, in what the test readout actually tells you. So far as I understand, it can distinguish between types of rodenticide broadly. So anticoagulant versus non-anticoagulant, and the different types within non-anticoagulant. But I don't know that you can identify a specific brand name or chemical from that test.
So like Protif, how do you pronounce it? Protifacum? Protifacum? Is
The
that's
Brodifalcum, yeah.
Protifacum is one
Yeah.
potential one.
Yeah.
And I know there are pharmaceuticals like you mentioned a while back, Leland, and that kind of triggered some thoughts in my head. That also are, anticoagulants, obviously, like warfarin being one.
Yes.
I'm wondering, there's somehow, an opportunity. It looks like here, just briefly looking at a study done in Germany, that they found, high levels of anticoagulants in fish downstream of wastewater treatment facilities. Is there any talk of that being a possibility if maybe they actually have warfarin in their body and we can't tell the difference between the rodenticide and an anticoagulant pharmaceutical?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And yeah, I don't know enough to say whether or not those two things can be distinguished. I do know that warfarin has a lot of instructions on the label about the ways that you're supposed to use it, and it does not always get adhered to. And so, yeah, that's definitely a worry, is that it ends up in places where it shouldn't be. And I really don't know that it can be distinguished from Brodifalcum, from dimethylalone, or any of the other ones.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Anna, I think after hearing your testimony, everyone here probably is interested in visiting at some point. So we'll have to follow up on that. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how the raptors, but any animals that FINS deals with, how do they get to you? Is it folks in just around the state know that that you're the place to call, or do you work with law enforcement?
Yeah, all of that. We are primarily reliant on members of the public to bring us wildlife, birds in particular. We are not licensed to treat mammals that they find in the environment, but we're also well known by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife community, and Fish and Wildlife officers will bring us, in particular, the larger raptors. We would not expect a member of the public to go and pick up a bald eagle all by themselves. So often Fish and Wildlife gets involved. We have seen a dramatic increase in the number of birds that we intake in the last 7 years or so, and we attribute that to more people being aware of us and the work that we do. Not necessarily that more birds are getting injured, but more people are understanding that, oh, if I see an injured owl, or I suspect that this bird is injured, I can call VINS and they can give me advice, and I can take it in. But we're heavily reliant on the public to bring us injured birds. And as such, as we expect, people are very interested in the fate of the birds that they bring to us. Every individual gets a patient number. And so we will give that patient number back to the finder, and they're welcome to call us and ask about how that bird that they brought is doing, and we'll give them an update.
But Representative Lipsky had a question, but before he asks, is there a licensed, or is there a major licensed rehabilitator in the state that does handle mammals?
Yes, there are several. I wouldn't say that any of them are major, in that we're the largest clinic in the state. We have, in the summertime, a staff of 7 individuals, most of the licensed mammal rehabbers in the state are doing it out of their own homes, which is very common in the rehab community. Volunteers who, kind of dedicate part of their time, 60 hours a week in the summertime to rehabilitating mammals under a mammal license, but none of them have hospital facilities.
Representative Lipsky.
Thank you, Anna. This is not meant to be a diversion, but we've taken a lot of question on avian flu and H1N1.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of the birds that you receive has that, or is that just too?
Fortunate, yeah, that's a big topic. We talk about it at VINS like it was second COVID for us. Essentially, we had to really rethink and reshore and build out the infrastructure for our biosecurity measures to ensure that the humans who are working with the birds that we were taking in were safe, and also our resident population, the birds who do the programs and ambassadors, were isolated from wild birds we were bringing in. Fortunately, we only saw one confirmed case of avian influenza in 2022. We got a bald eagle that tested positive. It was immediately euthanized and its body was handed over to Fish and Wildlife. But our rehabilitators are scientifically minded folk, and they tested about 200 of the songbird patients that we got in that year, that summer of 2022, and none of them had avian flu. And our assistant director published his findings in the Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation, that this songbird population, who were coming from all around the state of Vermont, were negative for avian flu. So we, using that information, have insulated ourselves pretty well from the at-risk birds. We don't take in adult waterfowl anymore, essentially. So there's an injured Canada goose or a mallard, we will not take that bird in because they are extremely high risk for bringing avian flu into our population, the way that like a bunch of ducklings probably don't have it. An injured robin or blue jay almost certainly doesn't have avian flu. So we've definitely been very, very conscious of that to protect ourselves and our resident birds.
Thank you. Good news.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that it's obvious, but you're in the rehabilitation. That's the world that you work in, and that's what VIN's role is. If a bird can be rehabilitated, it's brought to you, hopefully. If that bird is already dead, if somebody finds a bird that can't be rehabilitated, I'm wondering, and you might not have the answer here, but I'm wondering, how is that bird being tested for presence of rodenticide, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. As far as I know, it is not. We don't take in dead birds. People call us sometimes and ask, like, hey, I found a dead owl. Do you want it? The answer is no. We have plenty of live sick birds that we're dealing with, but our advice to that person who finds a dead bird, who unless they state, I think this bird died of poisoning, toxicity, unless they say that to us, we advise them to leave it where it is, perhaps drag it into the woods, leave it for nature to take its course. If there was strong suspicion or strong evidence that it was poisoning, we would advise that person to bury it, just so it wasn't kind of immediately obvious and out there in the ecosystem.
All right. I think we have asked all the questions that we have. Was there anything else that you wanted to add or to close with, Anna?
Nothing in particular, just to say that I'm really excited that this discussion is being had at this level. It's really great to hear all the questions that people have and, you know, wanting to learn about this topic. It's something that's really important to me, and I do talk to people about all the time. So happy to have been included in this discussion.
Well, we very much appreciate your joining us and sharing what you know, and along with the other witnesses we had this morning. I will just say before we take our break, I want to hear whether committee members have any immediate thoughts, but before asking for that, we have reached out. So we will be taking more testimony on this bill. We've reached out to several people who may or may not be able to testify, and then others have approached us with an interest in testifying. So I think we're expecting to hear from the Fish and Wildlife Department, the Vermont's Fish and Wildlife next week at some point. We have invited testimony from the Retail Grocers Association in the state, and I'm not sure that they're coming in, but they may have provided some written testimony to get that perspective. We've also heard from the pest management profession. They would like to come and provide their perspective. And we have also asked someone who I think may be in the business of providing alternative forms of pest management. So we've got several different viewpoints that we will be hearing from. And we'll encourage others, if you're interested, to let us know. But I think it's been very helpful this morning just to get a better sense of what the problem that we're trying to solve is. And that's always a good place to start. Thank you both. Just wanted to know whether committee members had any thoughts or feedback than what we've heard this morning, or what we'd like to hear maybe from others.
Yeah, just both of the folks on the screen right now mentioned the Tufts Wildlife Center. And I wonder if that might not be a bad place for us to contact in terms of somebody who would have had a high volume of exposure to, sounds like mostly raptors, and would be able to speak to the prevalence. I mean, it's Massachusetts, but I think our ecologies are similar enough that we could probably learn some useful things from them.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you. Make a note of that.
Did reach out to Terry Bradshaw from UVM, and he would be willing to come in. He manages the UVM apple orchard.
Yep.
And he says Wednesdays work best for him.
Okay.
So if you get him on the line right now, if you want, but.
I'll let Sidoni reach out. I think we've heard from Terry before, so we probably have his contact information. Yeah. Good. All right, good. Well, I think we'll pause there then, take a break, and pick this conversation up again. I think it'll be next week when we come back to it. Thank you.
Thank you.